everyone, I'm the Gaming Beaver, and I've just completed Little Nightmares' newest DLC, so you know what that means. So let's get into The Hideaway. And more importantly, those gnomes we see putting coal into the furnace. And let's start at the biggest reveal that this DLC had to offer, and that is that the gnomes were once children. The gnomes are children! Which is revealed to us cast by the shadows from the furnace near the end of the chapter. A little detail that can be easily overlooked, especially if you're just wanting to progress forward. One in particular looks very familiar, looking strikingly similar to the girl that we see at the start of the Runaway Kids campaign. But that's not the only evidence we have that link them to being kids. The drawings we saw all around them all, we thought were done by children, and that could be true. There's drawings of children very clearly with rounded heads, not pointed ones, like the gnomes have. The only drawing we've seen still in the process of being drawed? Is that a word? Is in the Hideaway chapter, and that was by a gnome. And even then it seemed to be an incoherent squiggle. No offense. So we need evidence that a child has drawn a picture, and I think I've found that child. Throughout the entire game in both chapters, there's drawings of Six scattered about the mall, which unless she's some sort of savior or prophet, had to have been done by someone who had seen her. And I believe this guy right here is that someone. The only person we know who has seen Six and could also have been transformed into a gnome. Perhaps this was his last meal before it happened, hence the reason why he gave away his food so freely. He knew he wouldn't need it. But why would this happen? And more importantly, how would this affect the story?
Well, if you just give me a second, I'll gather me notes.
I've mentioned in the past about the lady being responsible for the hypnotic spell cast that keeps the engine running. So maybe she doesn't control the engine directly, but instead the gnomes. The ones putting the coal into its gaping maw. Hey, you see what I did there? I'm a clever boy. But the gnomes seem to instinctively know what to do when they see the furnace, dropping what they're doing and going straight to work, seemingly without any influence from anything else, including the lady. Could the description of the lady's spell on the website be referring to something else? But we'll come back to that later, don't worry, it's going to be a juicy one. The other reveal is the janitor. No, not that he's got long arms and is bloody terrifying in the dark. He's been the one making the toys all along, as seen here when he picks up a toy and brings it to his workbench. And to the best of our knowledge, not the granny. Blows my granny theory out the window then. Well, don't jump the gun there, James. Maybe it doesn't. Well, not really. If anything, it reaffirms it. All I need to do is tweak that theory slightly, and it'll work. So guys, I'm going to be referencing the previous theory that had to do with the granny in the last video. So if you haven't already watched it, here's your chance now. Okay, let's go. So we mentioned about the granny coming aboard with the janitor, but what if she was here from the start? And what if the children were the ones working the furnace before the gnomes? They're about the same height and probably could do the same tasks. And the granny's role was to look after the children, and this was the state of things for a long time. The lady would attract the guests to the mall, and then kill them by stealing their souls in a similar fashion as we see Six perform at the end of the main game. Then the bodies would be taken to the chefs to be chopped up, ready to be served to the next set of guests. And the children would feed the clothes to the furnace, allowing the maw to move around and function properly. And while the maw is moving around, I'm going to assume it's picking up coal from the ocean's floor, and that explains where the coal's from. But what if, after a while, the children didn't want to do the work anymore? In the lady's description, it reads the maw needs to survive, that it's a sanctuary away from the outside world. So whether the lady really needs it to work or whether she just doesn't want to go back to the life outside the maw, she couldn't let this kind of problem go on, and she needed an alternative solution. So she gave the janitor two tasks. The first, to imprison the children and bring them to her, and recapture all of the escapees too. And the second was to create a new type of doll. And this doll was to lay the groundwork for the maw's future. It bears the eye symbol that we've come to associate with the lady, and it sits on the janitor's workbench where we've seen him work on the toys, And this is what I believe she gave the janitor, the prototype for the gnomes. It's also possible to assume that the lady can just transform children into gnomes without the janitor. I mean, she has the power to disappear and levitate objects. The power to transform children into gnomes isn't too out there. So the janitor would wrap children up and put them on a conveyor belt, and the lady would take the souls out of the children and place them into these empty vessels, the gnomes' bodies. And this conveyor belt may have been where the runaway kid was headed before he escaped from his little baggie. It's also possible that the scientist helped with this, and the combined efforts of him, the janitor, and the lady were able to create these beings. The lady, now with no use for the granny, and angry with her poor job of keeping the children in check, possibly the murderer of the only man she's ever loved, banished her into the depths. But as we know, she didn't die there. And that's where the janitor took pity upon her. He was the one who cared for her and gave her scraps. But wait, there's more! Now, after doing some research, there's multiple moments where the gnomes actually have light shed on them, from the torch, from the lighter, and even at the end of Six's campaign when the door is open. And quite clearly you can see that their shadows are just regular gnome shadows. So that means that this furnace is different. And it might be possible that the lady is the one responsible for this. Surely the gnomes wouldn't want to work, right? I mean, I know I wouldn't want to help a person who had just killed me and put me inside of a doll's body. So they would have to have some kind of motive. A motive that's the only thing they care about anymore. Being a child again. Their reward for working on the furnace is to gaze upon a hypnotic fire, presumably enchanted by the lady. A fleeting moment to remember what they once were, who they are, and then to go back down the stairs to work on the furnace again. But if the kids are sent on a conveyor belt to the lady by the janitor, that doesn't explain how the girl in the first chapter of the Runaway Kids campaign got turned into a gnome. Especially if she got eaten by a leech, which is what we came to the conclusion of in the last theory video. Which you definitely watched, didn't you? Yes! Good boy or girl. We don't play favorites here. Here I see two options. Either this gnome isn't the same girl, which is incredibly likely, and I'm pretty sure there would be multiple girls with similar looks, especially just from a silhouette. Or what if the lady has the power to turn bad children into leeches? Far-fetched, I know, but we've barely scratched the surface of the powers that the lady has. It's also possible that the janitor managed to catch her. I mean, just look at him go with those arms! So beautiful, so graceful. But it's in this very place not too long after that scene that we hear a gnome. And that could be that same girl having been transformed. There's also a drawing on the wall which depicts two gnomes on one side, a girl and a boy on the other, and the ever-watchful eye of the lady. Now on the Let's Play video I posted not too long ago of the full Hideaway campaign, I saw some of you guys comment maybe the searchlight is the one that turns the kids into gnomes, as we never see a child caught in the light other than the ones we play as. So we don't know 100% for sure if they do get turned into gnomes. But when you get caught in the light, you turn to stone, and there does seem to be other figures that have also met with the same fate. And I'm only assuming that these are kids, so it's possible that the lady might use the searchlight as an alternative way to take the souls of the children, reducing them to lifeless husks, and then putting them into the gnomes. But the eye does seem to be shining on the boy and the girl, which I can only assume are of the runaway kid and Six. If you look closely at the boy, he seems to have something hanging off his leg, just like the chain that hangs off the runaway kid's leg. And the girl seems to have some sort of figure following her or attached to her. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that this is the Shadow Six. A shadow version of Six that appears every time she eats something. But I'm not gonna talk about that right now because that could be a topic for its own video. So that leaves us to the cliffhanger ending. The meeting between the lady and the runaway kid. Originally, I first speculated that this happens between the lady getting in the elevator and Six following her up, the runaway kid being on top of the elevator when the lady goes to her quarters. However, that elevator was in the restaurant, which is near the top of the mall, as seen here by the guests entering. I would imagine that something like the engine room would be a lot deeper down in the mall's structure. So unless this elevator stretches the entire height of the mall, I can't see this being a likely scenario. And the scale of the mall is just ginormous. I mean, that's a whale for crying out loud. And not only that, remember, the janitor has his arms when we last see him in the Runaway Kids campaign, which means that unless Six managed to slice off the janitor's arms, escape the chefs and the guests in the time it took the runaway kid to get from here to here, it can't be the same elevator. And yes, this is the same janitor. He wears the same badge. I have checked. I thought maybe there was 2 janitors, but there's not. Also, it was found out his name's Roger. Yeah, I'm just gonna let that sink in for a minute. But let's say that there is an elevator that runs the entire height of the mall. And even then, the lady would have had to have gotten out the elevator and went back in again in order for this to have made sense. So that means that the next DLC must take place somewhere in between these levels of the mall. And we already know that the lady seems completely fine by the time Six gets to her, which means that this little interaction doesn't go very well for the runaway kid. However, just as recording this video, Little Nightmares has posted this teaser, showing a picture of the DLC that's going to be coming out next year, which shows the lady's mask on the floor. And I'm sure that's going to mess with her face theory video that I did not too long ago. God damn it. So who knows? Maybe it is gonna go well for him. We'll just have to wait. But with this cliffhanger, maybe we can predict what the next chapter will have in store for us. Most of the gnomes know to run from Six, and for good reason too. All of the gnomes she encounters don't actively help her, except for one. And what if that gnome didn't know any better? What if the child had just recently transformed into a gnome? And what if that gnome was the runaway kid, eager to help a fellow child? And that about wraps up today's video. Ooh, doesn't it just give you shivers? So again, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I just want to say a quick thank you for all the support you guys leave in my Little Nightmares series. It's honestly one that I truly love playing and theorizing. So if you guys have any questions on my theory and what you think works and what doesn't, and also your own theories, leave them in the comments below. I love reading them. And if you haven't had your fill of Little Nightmares content, you can click on any of these to take you to the playlist or another theory video. You know, I might be a bit biased, but they're alright. They're pretty good videos. And we'll have to wait till February for the final chapter of The Runaway Kid. Which is fine by me. All I've done is work on this video today. I need a bloody break. Jesus. Until next time, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.